is up guys, welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and today I've got what might be the most insane PC I have ever put together. With an i9 and an RTX 2080 Ti, this is my new personal gaming and editing PC build. The Netgear Nighthawk XR500 is the ultimate gaming router. With best-in-class hardware, speeds up to 2.6 gigabits per second, and a dual-core 1.7 GHz processor, it's pretty nuts. The inbuilt geofilter functionality allows you to set maximum connection ranges for servers and hosts in games, giving you the best connections and lowest pings. Combined with bandwidth allocation, you're able to prioritise devices and choose exactly how bandwidth is shared. Learn more at the links in the description below. Now before I dive into the parts and performance of the new system, I need to take apart my old PC, as I will be reusing just one or two components. It was a very powerful PC back when I built it in June, so not that long ago, with a Ryzen 7 2700 and a 1080 Ti, but didn't fit my workflow as nicely as it could have done, and the opportunity arose to build a new one, so I thought, why not? If you aren't already following me on Instagram, I will be posting photos of this system and loads of other incredible PCs, so go and give it a follow in the description below. I'm also giving away a $1,000 PC on there, you do not want to miss out. Back to this system in question though, and just how well does it perform? The RTX 2080 Ti enables fantastic performance at 4K in the latest AAA titles. Whether it's Call of Duty's Black Ops 4, Forza Horizon 4, Battlefield 5, you see in 4K high settings hitting that 60 FPS mark pretty consistently. If you tone down to some of the slightly older titles, even like Just Cause 3 or GTA 5, Overwatch, CSGO, League of Legends, you see in frame rates well above 100, 200 and even 300 frames per second at that 4K at ultra settings preset. If you look at the Cinebench R15 and the 3D Mark, Firestrike and TimeSpy scores, you can also see they're considerably higher than the system I'm moving away from, and I'll come to explain the differences in a moment's time. Now though, let's look at the parts I selected for this build and why I selected them, and kick it off as always with the CPU. Intel's latest and greatest Core i9-9900K is the top-end processor on their more consumer-oriented LJ1151 platform, but it does come with a pretty hefty price tag. Aside from the 8 cores and 16 threads, the most impressive attribute about this processor has to be its boost clock speed of 5 GHz out of the box, and that's before any overclocking occurs. This expanded core count and clock speed does lead to a higher TDP of 95 watts than you may find on some of the AMD Ryzen Plus Gen 2 processors, and unlike the AMD counterparts, it doesn't include a stock cooler, though that's not really an issue in this build as we're sort of going a little bit all out. I've also found the Intel chips to play a little bit nicer with editing software from the likes of Adobe and even Blackmagic Design, which of course contributes in a more professional oriented environment. For the CPU cooler in this build, I selected the latest and greatest unit from Cooler Master. It's their ML360R. It's got a 360mm rad with 3 of their included pressure optimized 120mm addressable RGB fans. You can then pair those fans with the case fans that I'm going to get onto in a moment's time to create a push-pull radiator config. The larger 360mm radiator in this push-pull config leads to better cooling performance, lower noise levels from the system, and thus better lifespan on your components and more overclocking headroom. The 9900K is one of the best overclocking CPUs as of late, and while all the benchmarks in this build were at stock speeds, it's nice to get a little bit of free performance. That brings me nicely onto the case I selected in this build. It's the Cooler Master MB530P. And not only do you get 3 addressable RGB fans included, as standard with a built-in RGB controller and, wait for it, RGB power button, you get a pretty conclusive front I/O with 3 tempered glass panels, the sides and the front, as well as pretty ample airflow to keep those noise levels and those temperatures as low as is possible. You also get the expected features such as a power supply shield, plenty of room to mount SSDs, ample cable management space, and a really nice build experience. It does officially only support ATX boards, but the eATX board I selected fits without a problem and doesn't block the cable grommets either. That brings me nicely onto the motherboard I selected for this build, and isn't today's video just full of really smooth segues? This is the MSI MEG Z390 GODLIKE motherboard. Oh my word. This has to be the most just insane motherboard I've ever seen. The feature list goes on and on. Ridiculous RGB integration with an infinite mirror design. You also get 3 M.2 slots on the motherboard itself with an included add-in card for a further 2, an included capture card for streamers, ridiculous VRM and power delivery with an auxiliary CPU and GPU power connector, an eATX form factor on a consumer Z390 board, built-in rear I/O shield, braided SATA cables. The list just goes on and on and on. It's a crazy motherboard that really isn't that great value for money, but if any build can make good use of it, it's this one, so why the hell not? And I'll link it with all the other components in the description below for different retailers and regions if you're interested in picking it up. For the RAM in this build, for the memory, the ridiculous RGB theme, I'm happy to say it continues. The ADATA Spectric D41 has a really nice diffused addressable RGB strip up top with a red or grey heat spreader design available. I initially installed their slightly older but still up to date D40 kit, but I thought this looked just a little bit more clean and tied in with the motherboard a little bit better. I did have to pick up 2 16GB kits for 4 8GB DIMMs in total, so that is worth bearing in mind. But all in all, with a 2666 MHz speed and plenty of room for overclocking, you can't go too far wrong. One of my favourite kits of RAM ever, if I'm being completely honest, and never had any stability or overclocking issues with this kit. For the storage in this build, this is an area where I maybe had a bit more self-restraint. No, that just didn't happen. Not only did I move over my MX300 Crucial M.2 and SATA drives from my previous build to keep my applications and Windows installs, I added a 970 EVO from Samsung, a 1TB drive that comes in around $240. The up-to-date pricing is in the description below and the card section here. The more standout storage add-on though is a new drive from Intel. This is their 900p Optane drive and fits in the PCIe form factor. This is the first and only SSD I've ever seen that has a backplate, and it looks completely nuts. With sequential read and write speeds over 2.5 gigabytes per second, this works very well for an environment where programs are hitting those drives in short bursts but with a lot of bandwidth. Premiere Pro scratch discs, this is going to be really, really nice. And it actually puts the bottleneck onto the software and not the hardware, which is something you can't really say all that often. Is it cheap? No, in fact you could probably buy a couple 1TB drives for the same price, but for the use case it's really, really quite cool. Moving on to the graphics card in this build, one of the components many of you will have been waiting for, it's the MSI GeekaOC RTX 2080 Ti. With 11GB of GDDR6 memory, support of course for that ray tracing technology to improve textures and shadows and reflections in games such as Battlefield 5. As you can see on screen now, it's a really nice GPU. With dual 8-pin power connectors, it's also pretty power efficient, and this MSI cooler adds a bit of RGB that syncs nicely with the motherboard, RAM, CPU cooler that I selected for this build. The 3-fan design also means factory overclock speeds are a welcome addition, with further overclocking legroom more than possible. It also stays nice and quiet and has a solid plethora of output options, including DisplayPort, HDMI 2.0 and USB-C to keep you nicely future-proofed. For the last sort of major part in this build, the power supply, I selected the Coolermaster V850. It's not going to give you that excited feeling of opening a graphics card, but it does the job nicely with an 80+ gold certification, fully modular interface, nice individually rubber sleeved cables. You can't really moan, really good customer support, really good reviews and a really nice warranty. As I said, a bit more boring than the other components, but very, very much so necessary. It's also worth noting that I added a kit of the Deepcool MF120 frameless aluminium RGB fans that you can see in the back and top of this system, as well as BitPhoenix's Alchemy addressable RGB strips. And I'll link all that in the description below. Adds a bit more of illumination, adds some more RGB to this build, as if there wasn't enough already. But that I think just about wraps it up for this video. Breathe. If you enjoyed today's video and are excited to see my RTX 2060 review, give it a big old like rating and make sure to get subscribed. Hit me up on the social media channels on your screen and in the description below. And as always, enjoy the glamorous end montage outro.